Why you should learn Python in 2022. Let's go. Hello, welcome everyone. My name's Sid. Welcome to the channel. And in today's video, we're going to cover everything you need to know about Python. Python is one of the hottest programming languages in the world today, and it's used by loads of big tech companies and also many new startups. And Python should be very much a language you should consider if you want to get into IT or you want to explore a career path in, say, data science, web development, data engineering, all sorts. So let's get started and let's talk about what Python is, what it means for you, and what it's all about. So, Python is a universal programming language. What does that mean exactly in the context of IT? A program essentially is an instruction. So if you can think of a computer code is essentially a instruction for a machine to go away and do something. And that's it. Python is used in a number of different fields. One of the most common of which is web development. So you'll see Python being used by a lot of web developers and software engineers. Additionally, it's also used in data science and data engineering. And finally, it's also used in the field of machine learning and artificial intelligence. Let's explore some of these themes in a bit more detail. So, web development. If you can think of a front end, and typically a front end in this regard is a website. If you can think of a website has many different elements. So typically it has a contact form, product pages, booking pages, checkout payment pages, as well as image galleries. All these elements are interacted by or with from a consumer's perspective. And on the opposite side, you also have a backend. Now, this is the side that a consumer typically doesn't see. The backend is held together centrally almost at most backend systems is a database. And this database holds various data points. So we're talking about customer details, booking records, and order details. Now, between the front end and the back end is a regular traffic, if you like, a regular traffic of data. And this data is moving between both front end and back end as and when customers are interacting with a given system. And typically, Python is used in this kind of scenario to help move data around or help move records or help move elements and ensure elements perform as they're supposed to. And typically, Python would be used to fetch data or also pull data in this regard. So this is a typical example of where Python is used in web, app, and software development. Data science and data engineering. So, in the world of data science and data engineering, Python is very much becoming a very critical coding language. If you can think of data as a jumble of Lego pieces which are completely unstructured, in data science, the scientist is typically looking to structure their data, and once this data is sorted, they can then arrange it and draw meaningful conclusions. In this instance here, we're visualizing the data to tell a story. And then once a story is put together, we can then put that into some actionable insight for a business. And Python here is used in every step of the journey. So typically you'd use Python to sort and arrange your data. You can also use Python to visualize your data, and you can also use Python to analyze it and draw meaningful conclusions. So Python is used very much at the heart of a lot of data science roles and data engineering, and we'll explore that in a future video. But rest assured, Python is very much a hot and very much needed coding language in the world of data science and data engineering. Machine learning. Now, this is a really interesting theme and topic. Here's an example for you. This is a a plot. This is a distribution plot, and on this plot you'll see a number of scores. So these are exam scores, and for every exam score belonging to a individual, you can see how many hours they've studied. And we can plot this on a chart to give us a bit more of a visual indication of a pattern or some kind of story. And here we have a another person. We have someone named Lewis. Lewis studies 5.5 hours every week. So the question here and the hypothesis here is, can you predict his score based on this visual that we already have? And the answer is yes. So what we can do is draw what's called a line of best fit. Now this line of best fit, I've made an attempt here, can fit very nicely, moving vertically upwards, moving diagonally upwards on this chart. And what it shows us essentially is a relationship between a score and the number of hours studied by a given individual. So we know that Lewis studies 5.5 hours every week. Can we predict his score? So one way to do this is to plot Lewis's score on this line of best fit. So here we can see 5.5 hours would place Lewis on the x-axis, on the bottom axis on this scale right here. And then if we move horizontally along, we can see it gives him a score of around 58, 57 as a percentage. So yes, we can predict his score using this kind of visualization. And this visualization is actually a piece of statistical analysis known as linear regression. Now, what does that mean in regards to Python? Python can be used to create linear regression charts. Like Python can be used to analyze data and predict different different results, whether it's an exam result or a statistic or a mathematical model. Python very much can be used to do prediction, and it's very much at the heart of machine learning today. So how popular is Python? Well, let's take a look. So guys, we're in Google. We're going to have a quick look at Google Trends to see just how many people around the world are actually searching for Python as a programming language. So if we do a search here for Python, we want to search for Python as a programming language, not as a reptile or an animal. And we want to compare it to a few other programming languages. And in this example, I'm going to compare it to JavaScript. And also we're going to compare it to SQL as well, or SQL as it's sometimes named or called. We're going to compare that over worldwide just to understand worldwide trends, and we're going to trend that over 5 years. Now Google presents us with some really interesting data right here. So as you can see, the blue line is Python, you can see the red line is JavaScript, and the yellow line is SQL. What's interesting is that Python and JavaScript have a similar search volume trend right up until April 2018. But after that point and up until to the present day, you can see that Python has actually pulled away, whereas the other two have somewhat moderately declined somewhat. But you can clearly see that the search volume or the search interest in Python has outgained the other two, and that clearly reflects on the fact that Python is very much an in-demand language today. And you can see the demand or the search volume is not just prevailing in one market, but it's actually prevailing in a number of different markets. So here you can see obviously North America, you can see China, you can see Russia and parts of Europe, very much in demand, and Python remains a very in demand search term as per Google Trends. And guys, I'm going to show you one more example of just how popular Python is. If we search for Stack Overflow, Stack Overflow is a very well-known website for web developers and engineers and IT folk. And what we're looking for is actually the Stack Overflow survey. So if I come back to this page here and search for the survey results for 2021, we can see Stack Overflow produced this annual developer survey. And what we want to do is not read the overview, but we want to go down to the page which mentions Python. So if we look to technology here, most popular technologies, you can actually see, though we can't see the visual just exactly, that Python remains one of the most popular programming languages in the world. So Python passed SQL to become our third most popular technology, and you can see that when we compare the survey results, we've got 83,000 responses. You can see that Python has recently overtaken SQL, which was previously third place. So Python, I would only imagine, will climb higher, and in the next few years, we may very likely see Python overtake HTML, CSS, and JavaScript to be the number one ranked coding language as per Stack Overflow. So here we are in LinkedIn, and this time I'm going to show you just how popular Python is as a skill in a lot of job entries and job postings. So here I'm going to search for Python, the actual name of the coding language itself, not necessarily a job title. And just by default, I'm selecting United States, and we're going to hit search. And you can see straight away that we've got a ton of jobs that appear. In fact, we've got 873,000 job postings in the US alone, which contain a mention of the word Python somewhere in their job descriptions. So let's just take an example here. We'll take an example of, say, this one right here, which is a data scientist role working in ad marketing analytics for Google. And if we look inside here, we can see obviously the job role itself, where it's located, obviously some minimum qualifications. If we do a search here for the word Python, you'll see right there that a minimum requirement for this job role is that you need some experience with Python, well, statistical software in this respect is what they're calling it. And what you'll see throughout all these roles, no matter what page you go on or no matter what role you look at, every single role has a mention of Python from a statistical point of view, or from a data engineering or data science point of view, or web development point of view. So Python is very, very much a highly required skill set, and one which will do you really well if you learn it and you're trying to get yourself a new career or a new job. So jobs that require Python. So we covered a number of themes and topics earlier. Here's a list of various job titles that typically you'll see are using Python in their day-to-day roles. So as I mentioned before, you have data scientists, engineers, and analysts. Myself being previously an analyst using Python. And we also have software developers and app developers, DevOps, and machine learning engineers and artificial intelligence engineers. So all these roles require Python to some extent, and very much is needed to perform these type of roles. So salaries, now that we've discussed and I've shown you some of the roles, let's look at some typical salaries. Now these results are from Glassdoor in the US as of today, June 2022. So typically an average salary for a software engineer is around 108,000 US dollars. A data scientist, on the other hand, is earning on average $117,000, and a data engineer is earning $115,000. But what does that mean? When we compare it to the average US salary, you can clearly see that those who are in those type of roles are earning far more than the average US salary. So if you learn Python today and you manage to acquire one of these type of roles, you're actually doing really well, because the salaries for these type of roles are only increasing day by day, as we're seeing a skill shortage in many different markets. So why it matters to businesses? I think this is the most important question you should be asking yourself, and really the question you should start with when you want to embark on a journey or learn something, especially if you're trying to get yourself a job. So Python is very much an open source language. What does that mean for businesses? Typically, a business is used to spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on licenses for software. Python, on the other hand, is an open source language. It doesn't require any commercial licenses per se. So a company can adopt Python and have its engineers and its staff use Python with very little investment required to get going. Now, IT transformation, what do we mean by that? A lot of big companies are modernizing their technology stacks, and Python is very much at the heart of some of their transformations. So it's very much an in-demand language, especially where companies are moving from legacy systems and they're transferring their data to more newer technology stacks. Automation offerings. So we talked about automation previously, but Python actually has what's considered a relatively shallow or low learning curve. Python is easy to pick up and understand. We'll cover that in the next video, but that allows businesses to get started and allows their employees to pick up coding relatively easily without a huge investment upfront. And as I mentioned before, Python allows for businesses and allows for people to analyze large databases. And a lot of big companies are sat on huge data sources, huge databases, and huge data warehouses. Python is a great coding language to analyze such large volume of data. The other big benefit is that it's a scalable solution. Anything that you develop in Python can be rapidly scaled globally, regardless of any geographic barrier. And finally, Python enables for rapid prototyping. So you can code in as little as a few lines and develop a program, and from that program you can rapidly expand it and prototype it or test it or put it into a production environment and have that program actually delivering results. So this is why it matters for businesses, and this is why it continues to matter for businesses. And I think it's very much a language you should pick up today if you're interested in establishing a career in IT. How Python compares. So Python is not the only programming language we'll discuss on this YouTube channel. There are a number of other big programming languages. Some of them I mentioned earlier, JavaScript being one of them, and you will have seen JavaScript is actually the number one language on Stack Overflow's developer survey. Additionally, another big language that almost goes hand in hand with Python is SQL. SQL is an old language. SQL's been around for a long time, and it was established to allow people to query databases. We'll cover SQL at a later stage. And then there are other languages some of which are related, some of them are not. HTML is closely linked to JavaScript in that it's a web language. Essentially is a language that sits behind websites and the design of websites. And then you have a few other old granddad languages, as I call them, C being one of them, C# you will have heard of. And C is actually a more powerful language than Python. However, it's a more difficult language to code in. The demand for C still exists. However, it's slowly dwindling, and we'll come on to that later. Other languages, another old language is PHP. But then you've got some other interesting languages. R is very much a language which Python is compared to frequently, and R has some great packages for data science. And then finally, you've got two more languages which are very new and very modern. You've got Rust and you've got Go. Go is short for Golang. And both Rust and Go are compared to Python in terms of their speed and performance. Now, we'll cover some of these languages in future. Part and parcel of being an IT specialist or an IT professional requires you to learn more than one language. So we'll come back to some of these languages again in future. But Python is very much a good and great language to adopt. So I hope this video has given you an idea of what Python is about and why you should learn Python in 2022. In the last few years, I've seen more and more roles and more companies look for people who have Python skills, and not just those who work in IT, but also those in finance. So I highly recommend you pick up Python. I, I would like to think that anyone who's learning Python within around 15 to 20 hours, you've actually developed a good grasp of Python. And it really is a straightforward language to pick up. It's one of the easier ones compared to some older school languages that are out there. So I highly recommend you pick up Python and stay tuned because we've got many, many more videos to cover, which will include Python, and we'll do some in-depth examples of some business use cases and business challenges which can be solved with Python. Next video, we're going to cover how you can set up Python on your own machine. So essentially, you want to set up your own development environment so you can code in Python. We're going to write our very first Python code, and we're also going to solve a simple business problem using Python. So guys, please like, comment and subscribe. Hope to see you in the next video.